Hello, everybody. I'm Simona from Startup Lithuania, and I'm very happy to be your host for today, the fourth Startup Fair Challenge 2020 online session. This session is dedicated to the main topic of this year's conference, which is challenges. I'm very pleased to present the experts and today's speakers who are going to share their thoughts and lessons we can all learn from. Giedrė Čiuladienė and Samir El-Savin.
Hello.
Thank you all for watching, and do not hesitate to ask questions in the comments section, and we will answer them after each presentation. As there is nothing else to wait, we can start with the first topic of today, which is 10 lessons of the startups you should learn from, presented by Giedrė, as an associate partner at the law firm Triniti. Giedrė has more than 15 years of experience and strong expertise across civil and labor law. She advised such startups as Oberlaw, Trafi, Deeper, TransferGo, and many more. I'm sure Giedrė can tell you more about herself. So Giedrė, the stage is yours.
Hello, my name is Giedrė Čiuladienė. I'm a lawyer at Triniti, and I work a lot with startups. Therefore, I would like to share my ideas on the lessons where you can learn from. And these lessons will actually be based like mistakes that you can learn from. So what are we going to talk about? The law on development of small and medium business provides a definition, which is rather complex, and it sounds like this. A startup is a very small company with high and innovation-based business development potential, registered in the register of legal entities for no more than 5 years. So what it means, it actually gives the main features of this company, and it states that it is a young company, so it has no experience or a small experience only. The other feature is innovations, which also means that there is no experience because it provides something new. And the third feature is the quick development, which means that there is no time to think. So every presentation and every business should start with a question why. So why are we talking about those mistakes? Is that we should give the possibility for a company to have a quicker start. Also, it's easier and cheaper to learn from the others' mistakes. You know, Lithuanians like laughing at the others' mistakes, but now we are here not to laugh, but to learn. Then you should also know that theory is summarized practice. People sometimes say that it's not necessary to go to university to know everything. That it might be learned from practice directly. You can do business without learning, but in fact, when you know all the theory which is gathered and provided by the university or other school, it's easier to start. So the first biggest mistake of a startup is building the product in a cave and staying in the box. As we know, wish of each founder is to want that they want their customers to be happy with the product, to enjoy it and to use it very widely. But the problem is that when creating the product basing on own experience only, you don't really know what is the actual need, and you have an illusion that it is needed by the customer, but you don't really know what is the real need. And here the solution is to bring the idea to the customers before launching. This way they can test and tell what is wrong, what is missing, and so on. The theory gives a rule, a specific rule for this, which is called 50% rule of traction. And it means that a startup should divide its time into two parts. So the first part is the creating of a product, and the other part is introducing it to the market. So marketing is also very, very important side of this. And as I'm a lawyer, I want to share my ideas and what are the threats here. So IP really matters in this case, and if it's possible to safeguard those IP rights before introducing to the market, it should be done. Also, the company should keep the intellectual property rights and not the employees that have created, or not the freelancers that have offered some solutions. Also, confidential information should be safeguarded also. So when you talk to producers or other partners, you should sign a confidential information agreement whereby you say what is limited to transfer. So the second mistake is being a feature freak or idealist. I'm telling that because founders sometimes get into the production of the product too deeply, and they try to get as much features as possible. However, again, the question why is very important. So the founder should remember that it really has to solve the real problem, the actual problem that was from the beginning. So when there are too many features from the beginning, it makes the customers confused. What is the goal of that product? What is the problem that is really solved? And here the solution is that it's possible to make the first version of the product very simple, and then to develop it and to add more features upon the customer's comments. And here the legal side is the same, that intellectual property issues really matter. The third mistake is lacking the ability to change or pivot. Here, the idea is that 99% of successful startups don't end up being the product we thought in the beginning. They change their idea basing on the comments of the customers. Here, I have nothing to add from the legal side, but my further thoughts will be given later. The fourth mistake is hiring the wrong people. Here, the main idea is that the founders and other early employees that joined the startup, they work really a lot, and they work for almost nothing. They just believe in the idea so strongly that they agree to work almost for free. But when the culture is not the right one, that enthusiasm expires, and then you end up with being participants in the company and with no possibility to develop the company further. So the idea here is that skills can be taught, but the culture cannot be acquired. It is sometimes said that to become a professional, you need 10,000 hours, and there is no recipe for for the culture to get installed in a person. So the advices from a lawyer here are that every employee or a freelancer should have a probation period. In the labor law, it's allowed to set a probation period of up to 3 months. So it's very useful during this term to test the employee whether he fits with his culture or not. Then the other option is to choose the right type of employment contract, which might be of indefinite term, but with probation period. Then you might choose a fixed term agreement. Also, maybe it's worthy to offer a project employment contract, which means that some project should be performed during the term which is agreed by the company and the employee, and so on. The other measure is usually offered in the startups is option agreements, but the main rule here is to set the correct goals for the employee or freelancer to be achieved, and to set other right preconditions, like being a good employee and not to terminate the employment contract, or service agreement for example 2 years or 3 years, and to prove that the person is loyal and able to achieve the goals that were set for him. And I liked two sentences in this respect, that it was said by the co-founder of Pestotech, that it's okay to hire bad programmers, but it's not okay to hire wrong programmers. They can always be trained, but they can never be changed. So it's really very important to have the right people in the startup, because you won't be able to change the character. The fifth mistake is not launching the product early. The main idea here is to make the product so impressive that everybody wants to grab it. However, this attitude is a bit wrong, because in the beginning, nobody really cares about the product. And usually in the beginning, the first users are mostly teammates or friends who are forced to install the app and try it. When you launch the product too late, you have no feedback to keep iterating, to keep changing the product, to keep adding something. As was said in the beginning, that the product should not have too many features. And then it's wrong to think that the first negative impression will have a very bad impact on the brand, because it takes time to develop the brand. So you get feedback and you develop the product, and it's getting better and better, and it becomes more and more known to the customers. And from the legal side, lawyers are always angry, and they don't understand why companies do not start their activities from completing full legal documentation. So the lawyers cannot understand it, but it's totally clear to the business people, because the first thing is to create the product, and only then when you see the effect on the customers, only then you go to the legal side. So the same principle should be kept here as well, as regards to the product launching not too late. So we move to the sixth mistake, which is not researching competition or doing it improperly. What it means that the competitors, if they exist, they validate the market for you. They tell whether the product is really needed and whether it will be successful. If there are no competitors, an exclamation mark should pop up in your head and raise some questions. So the first question is, does the problem you want to solve really exist? Or maybe it's only in your mind. The second question is the problem widespread enough to warrant creating a business to solve it? Maybe it's just an illusion that somebody will pay for the product. And the third question, are you sure that there are no competitors? So the seventh mistake is raising a tone of money right away. Once you know that, and you know that there is demand for the product and you prove it, potential investors will see your company as more valuable. So as a result, you will have higher valuation, and the real aim is to have higher valuation of the company and not just amount of funding itself. Why I'm saying that the higher the valuation is, the less shares you give to the investors, and the higher the subscription price of the shares is. So from the legal side, I should say that investment agreements create a lot of obligations next to the rights. So the more money is given by the investors, the more rights they want to have. For example, the more reporting they require from the founders, so the more time is spent on preparing the reports. Then there is a usual clause on liquidation preference, which means that money is firstly given back to the investors with some extra rate, and only then to the founders. Also, there are a lot of restrictions on transfer of shares of the founders and obligation to stay in the company for a particular time, which means that the founders have to devote their time to the company only for a particular time. And the higher the amount is, the wider the scope of the obligations. It's natural. So the eighth mistake is handling money that you have received incorrectly. Again, I would like to give a quote, which was said by John Ranton. If a venture capital firm just handed the company a big fat check, it may be expecting a big fat result very soon. And it's really so. So because the return is expected really quickly. The startup is considered to be a company which raises very quickly. Therefore, the result is expected also quick. And here, the mistakes of the founders are hiring a ton of people and at once, not step by step. And then it's sometimes discovered that some employees are not needed, but if you want to get rid of them, you have to make payments, compensations for termination of the employment agreements. Also, we have to spend a lot on salaries. The other mistake is that there are unnecessary expenses made. Then the founders don't think about reserves for unexpected changes. Maybe they have to pivot and change the product. And then there are no or delayed payments from the clients, which prevents from getting other funding and which is needed for development of the business. And sometimes the investors back out and they don't give the remaining part of the promised investment. Here, the legal side is that violating an investment agreement may result in fines or maybe a refund of the investment, and sometimes even results in personal liability of the founders. So a founder should be careful when signing the investment agreement. He should ask for permission to spend. Maybe he should approve the budget with the investors to be safe that it will not result in his personal liability. The ninth mistake is not asking for help. So every founder should know that there is no shame to ask. Also, there is startups ecosystem where he can go for an advice. There are specialized nonprofit organizations. Also, what is often used is knowledge investment, when investment is received from the companies that act in the same area, and they or maybe not in the same, because acting in the same business field is a bit dangerous for stealing the idea, but maybe in corresponding market it would be advisable to get investment from such a company, because it might share its experience. And it's important to get more than one person's opinion on issues that you are facing. It's like going to one doctor and decide to make a surgery. It's always better to check at least with two doctors. So the same is here. And the last but not the least is neglecting legal protection. It's always a difficult problem when you start business with your friends, because it's usually done in startups when some friends sharing the same idea decide to work together, and they think that concluding any agreement is like concluding a marriage agreement, which means that there is no love. But no, it's not about trust, it's not about love, but it's about remembering. I have a story here when we decided with our neighbors to make a fence together. We decided to share the costs, but then we, of course, didn't write anything. And now somebody paid for that fence, somebody didn't, but we don't really remember who didn't, even though we still live happily together. So from the lawyer's view, it is very, very important to think about the legal steps. And the first one is setting up a company with correct shareholding. So if you believe that the impact of each founder is the same, you should share capital in equal parts and have the same amount of the shares. However, it's not wrong to think that some founders' impact is bigger, and for him to have a bigger share in the company. And then it's very, very important to have a shareholders or founders agreement even before investment. And here again, it's all about remembering what you have agreed, what are your responsibilities in the company, what are the options for getting out of the company, who should acquire the shares, when, and for which price. Then going further, when you need extra people, employment agreements with the early employees should be correct, of the correct form, with probation period, and it should really include the transfer of intellectual property rights to the company, because when it doesn't, it means that after 5 years it will go back to the employee. And protection of confidential information is also important. Stock options is a very useful measure for startups because they don't really have a lot of funding in the beginning to pay salaries from. Therefore, they offer the employees to have to sign option agreements, and the employees are entitled to acquire the shares in future. So here the decision should be adopted whether the option should be provided by the founders, or by which founder, or by the company. It will actually have a serious effect later on when investors come, and some of the founders are diluted because they have to transfer some of their shares to the employees or freelancers. Then it's important to have proper privacy policy, intellectual property rights protection, and other compliance type items that actually depend on the business that you develop. So this is it about the mistakes, and all of these may be summarized to have a recipe for success. So the recipe is unique and needed product, timely launch, the right people, proper and timely funding and its handling, seeking knowledge, legal protection. Of course, I didn't mention some things that are out of the scope. So also a lot of hard work and belief in yourself is also needed, and a bit of success. Our law firm, Triniti, works a lot with startups. That's why I wanted to share this knowledge with you. What we actually see from the legal side and how it might be protected. So thank you for your attention, and I will be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Giedrė. It was really insightful, and I have several questions. So when should I, if I'm a startup founder, when should I start knocking at the lawyer's door? You just shared some knowledge, and maybe I think it's clear for me, and I do not need to get advice at the beginning. When you suggest getting those advices from a lawyer, when I'm just starting a business, or when I'm first getting a investment, or when?
I think that it's very important to start thinking from the beginning about law. It's advisable to go to a lawyer just to meet and to get the first advices how to proceed even before founding a company, because later on when you start talking to the investors, you might have a lot of problems already. So it's better to go to the lawyer earlier, maybe not to take so many advices that the cost would be too high, but to get the main idea how to develop the business.
Okay, and if I already made those mistakes, am I alone, or can you share if those big startups from Lithuania, such as Oberlo, Trafi, Deeper, also made some mistakes? Is it possible to skip those mistakes?
It's always possible to correct those mistakes, but sometimes the cost is too high. So maybe there are too many mistakes due to taxes or similar effect. But of course, usually it's possible to correct those mistakes.
Okay, thank you, Giedrė. As we just started a book challenge yesterday, I'm asking for you to think of a book you would recommend our startup ecosystem members to read and share it on LinkedIn. So thank you for today. And I'm happy to go to the next speaker for today, who is Samir El-Sabin. And as we just heard, what kind of challenges we could face during the journey of a startup, it is clear that we need to start building resilience. So today, I'm happy to have a venture partner for Nordics and Baltics at Joyance Partners, Samir, who is going to share his experience in building resilience and turning challenges into success. Samir, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Yes, my name is Samir El-Sabini, and I'm here to talk about resilience and how you can turn challenges into success. And I think, it was interesting to see the last presentation, because I think a lot of what I would talk about is also mistakes you can do, but hopefully from another angle. But to start off, just to understand who I am before we go any further, I am actually also a lawyer by trade, so I'm an educated lawyer. Haven't worked so much with it, a little bit with the M&A part at Lindahl and Vinge in Sweden. But mostly and primarily why I'm here and why I work at Joyance is because I'm a founder. I founded two companies, one AdClouds, an ad tech company, and another one called Trader, which is an e-commerce startup. To make it very black and white, you could say that AdClouds was a huge failure, where we did all the mistakes that Giedrė actually pointed out in her list. So 10 mistakes of 10 possible. While in Trader, I would say we were better. I also was part of an organization called Sveriges Elevkårer, which means the Sweden Student Association. I was chairman there when I was 20 years old. I was head for 50 people. I remember in the finance crisis, when we had to lay off 20 people. And I think that was my first time when I really felt the need of, perseverance and resilience and overcome the challenges ahead of us. We're now also in COVID times, so I can say that we're seeing a lot of startups struggling out there. And from our perspective, we also, we always want for our portfolio companies, but also for all startups to succeed. And I hope this presentation can give you some tips and hopefully helps. And if you want to talk afterwards, just send me an email on samir@joyancepartners.com. Lastly, before we go from me, I also was head of the Startup People of Sweden, which is the biggest startup community in Sweden. And there I learned a lot about what other startups do, which mistakes they encounter, which one is the use, the common ones, and also maybe which one is, or how you should look at them in order to avoid them. And now, as you can see on the big J, I'm at Joyance. So today we're going to talk about resilience, but first I just want to introduce Joyance Partners. I actually was in Vilnius exactly before the Corona crisis, and I love Vilnius. I hope I can come back as soon as possible to Lithuania, and it seems like it will open up soon. But I will talk a little bit what we do and who we are and our portfolio here in Europe, and then go straight into resilience. What is it? Why is it important? Your startup, so not you as an individual, but your startup. And then you, is there any help out there? And lastly, the books. That's so important here for the challenge. I hope also you have a lot of questions, and hopefully we have time to take them in there. So Joyance, we are a US-based early stage venture fund. And actually, if you look at PitchBook, we in Q4 2019 was the fourth most active global early stage investor. So we started out in US, but we also have partners in Japan, in Asia, and also now in Europe. We came to Europe in 2019, and then one of my boss and colleague, Paolo, who is the managing director in London, was hired, and he heads up the European team. And now we have venture partners in France, in Germany or the DACH region, and in the Southern Europe, and also a team in London covering UK. And then me. So I'm responsible for the Nordics and for the Baltics. And what we do is that we invest in companies which we believe have the capacity to deliver delightful moments. So we believe that we are good, and I think we have proven this in the US and now also in Europe, that we can identify companies that have emerging science, or have a solution based on emerging science in health and happiness. So that is our focus. With that note, I would say that we are rather broad, and we also have a sister fund called Social Starts, which also invests in companies, everything from edtech to some vertical SaaS. But what I think is also important to remember is that even if we are very focused on health and happiness, we also are, like all venture capitalists, raw capitalists. So we are here to support ventures we believe can become of great value, and that is what we look for. Okay, some of our companies here in Europe. So we have some companies in 2019. We did our first investments, and I just want to show you this so you understand a little bit about us. We have two companies focused on mental health in Europe, Limbic and Doppel. And you can see here how we describe why they are delightful. If I go to the next step, this is the investments we have done in 2020, and also actually two ones from Social Starts. And I think the reason I want to show this from 2020 is also to say that we are doing investments. COVID-19 hasn't stopped everything. And I think, it's still possible to do business, and you shouldn't be afraid to come out there and raise a round. Obviously, you should realize that a lot of things have changed, but great companies will, be resilient and win even so. Okay, so this is about us. Going over to the main topic, resilience. I think it's important to, start off with what do we mean with resilience? And I think for me, and the overall definition is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. I'm not a psychologist, and all I'm saying now is my own experiences, how I look at it, and probably if you would talk with someone who treats patients, they would see it more from a side on trauma or tragedy, and how people survive in those kind of situations. Not looking down on that. I think from a starter perspective, it's important to put resilience in our context. But what I think is interesting is that when you look at child psychology, one of the most important things regarding resilience is that kids that suffer from great traumas, they often, when we look at which one are the survivors, they are said to have an internal locus of control. And that means that you have and I think viewpoint is the right word. You have the viewpoint or idea or self-esteem to believe that events in your life derive primarily from your own actions. And I think this is very important to understand also as a startup founder, this concept. My father is a refugee from Palestine. When I look at his resilience, and I'm very impressed by how he survived from war, coming to a new country and building up a new life. A lot of it is based on the fact that when he talks about his life, his own actions mean something. And I think that is the first thing you as a startup founder should have in you. And we'll come a little bit more closer to how you can work on that if you don't feel that, if you always feel that someone is deciding, your path for you. However, before we go into the actual examples, I think it's also important that resilience can change over time. It's not something static. From a personal view, I think, when you look at you yourself, it's always DNA and then there's environment. So you have those two parts. But everyone has a breaking point. No one can handle so much trauma. No one can, go through hell to hell. So, and the same way you can build up your resilience with the right moves. This is also important when you think about your startup, because you yourself control the fate of how resilient your startup will be. This is something I learned firsthand in my first startup, doing all those mistakes, not being resilient, and preparing our own failure. Okay. So resilience in the case of a startup. So a lot of, I think, VCs, they always talk about grit. Like, grit is one thing we look for in a founder. And I also do that. And why do you look for grit? So you look for grit because, like Elon Musk says, I think it's, I know it's a little bit cheesy using Elon Musk's, quote these days, but Elon Musk say, starting companies like eating glass and staring into the abyss. And I think that is correct. It's so hard. It takes so long time to be successful. There's so many unknowns, and you're taking up on yourself a lot of responsibility. And in order to actually be able to succeed or have the chance of succeeding, you need to be, hardworking. You need to, really want it. And you need to be resilient, that you can overcome all of these, unknowns, challenges coming to you. And I think, it's interesting because just for 6 months ago, when we talked about unknowns, it was more like for many founders, it was more like a theoretical concept, like, it can be a finance crisis and so. But right now, in the COVID crisis, it's very real. And I think this will mean that a lot of founders, also obviously investors going forward, will think of those kind of, changing moments or changing risks in a more realistic and also practical way. Okay, your startup. And I think what I mean when I say that, your startup need to be resilient, it's a lot about the mistakes you heard about in the last presentations. And it's a lot about the setup. And what I think most founders don't want to maybe accept is that they themselves are the ones who determine the resilience, and their decisions from day one is, cumulative and over time, what makes the next challenge either easy to overcome or impossible. And a little bit like, we heard in the summary and in the questions, like, can you overcome, even if you've seen these great startups, if they have made these mistakes, it's not impossible to win. All of that is, coming down to the amount of mistakes. And I think that is the importance to understand. It's not only, one mistake to another, it's an interaction of mistakes. So if I look at my startup, AdClouds, when I started with 2 other founders. So the first mistake we did from a company view, and which then affected our resilience going forward was that we three didn't, have a clear and agreed upon, idea of why we did this. So our passion as a group wasn't aligned. And I think this is rather common, because if you want to start a company, if you have a great idea, you need talent around you, you're open to, look away if you feel that someone maybe not as driven as you are, maybe not, don't need it. Maybe they do other things, they don't focus as clearly. However, that setup, that, base affects every decision. And if you're doing the wrong thing there and compromise, I think that also not only makes you less fundable, it also, creates the playing field for your failure going down the line. And not going through all the mistakes we heard about before, but it's, it's in the end, it's about, commitment. It's about, experience for the company. If you have the right skill set. We meet a lot of founders, a lot of startups that tells us like, oh, we don't have a technical co-founder, or we don't have this science co-founder. If it's like a plant-based startup, you're doing, cellular meat or something, and they don't see it as a problem, because in the, short term, you can fix that. You can hire developers outside. You can pay for a scientist. But when we look at a 10-year period, and we want, we know that you're going to face 10, 15 crushing, challenges. If you every time need to hire someone else to fix that for you, that will not be enough. And either you fix that before you start, or you put yourself in a really bad situation where not as a company are not resilient at all. The other part is product. And I fully agree, with the focus on user-focused development, as I call it, in order to actually have a development which is resilient, where you do not end up in a place where you have put a lot of time, a lot of cost, and then need to redo everything. And I think that is what it's all about, being resilient, setting up yourself, and in this case, the company, to minimize cost going forward, minimize the cost of the challenge and the flexibility to overcome the challenge. Then obviously you have culture. When I look at ad clouds, we were so, I think, I came from that generation, Facebook generation, where you heard that, you need to be really aggressive, you need to fail fast. The problem was that we interpreted it as, you need to move so fast that it's okay to do a lot of wrong things. That is not right. I hired, 25 people in 4 months. Half of them I compromised. I knew that they didn't have the 100% right skill set. I knew they wasn't the right fit for the company culture, but I hired them anyway, because I thought we need to develop this now. We need to market this now. The problem is that then when the challenge is coming for the company as a whole, and you need to move in one direction, you don't have that in your company. Half of your company wants to leave. It's like you being, in a situation, and we'll talk about yourself as a person later, but half of your body just don't want to do it. You just want to sit down and give up. And you don't want to have that in your company. Also, I think, there's a situation where when you hire the wrong people, and also when you're not a good leader, you're starting to, lie for your, the team members, in the sense that you're trying to protect them. And that's not good for the resilience. Resilience, is, in order to have a true resilience in the company, your team members, the whole company, needs to have a transparent and honest understanding of where you are and where you can do, and the challenge you are, facing. So what does this, end up with? I think a lot of you guys, I don't know how many of you have funding, but I remember when we in ad clouds, we raised our first big seed. And I sat on a train from Stockholm to Gothenburg, where I live. And I, shook hands with the investor, we signed the term sheet. And, on the train, I just felt this like biggest, darkness coming over me. The greatest anxiety, probably one of the, worst anxiety I felt in my life. Because I realized then that I took a lot of money from a lot of people I respected, and I have convinced them to invest in us. And I knew 100% clear that we weren't, we hadn't done everything. We haven't even done 70% of the things I knew we should have done. And that we weren't prepared to, to deploy that money and actually win. And I realized that I'd waited to do a lot of those things because I thought that as a company, if you get that outside investor, if you, have that backing and have that money, you can correct all of those mistakes. But that's not true. You should do that before, but because otherwise you only put financing as the last mistake on top of it. And it's not only heartbreaking for yourself, but it's not a good, it's not good to start correcting mistakes after you took in money. Then you want to just push, you want to have momentum. And I think to be, I wouldn't say that, then, but looking back, I think our, the decision in the end to close down started when we closed the round, if you understand what I mean. Because then we realized that, the money we got wasn't enough, and we should have, done everything differently from the beginning. And then obviously, and the reason I can talk about this, rather happily is because we did that later on in the new starter. So, but the main lesson from this, and from my perspective, is that you should understand that complexity is very real regarding resilience and failure and mistakes. Negative factors, they multiply with each other and compound. And that is the reason you need to, try to do the right thing in every decision, and it's much easier to do everything right when you're focused on one clear problem. And that's the reason also why investors like when you're very focused on one clear problem. Okay, so, but what about you? So now we talked about the actual, the startup, the company. And I think, we started out with passion, like, are you co-founders? Do they have the same incentive like you are? Are they aligned? Are you driven? But I also think it's important to be really honest about yourself, because I meet a lot of founders who should really sit down and be responsible. And now it probably sounds like a life coach, but you are responsible for your own life. No one, threatened you. Hopefully no one threatened you to be a founder. No one, said that that's the only way. So the first thing you should ask yourself, if, when you talk about resilience and understanding your own resilience, is, do I really want to do this? The second part is, am I doing this of the right reasons? So that's the passion part. And to be honest, I think, a lot of times it's obvious that people doesn't do things for the right reason. And the main incentive behind that is that they are more short-sighted. They have a very hard time understanding the long commitment a company is. And therefore, they excuse to themselves that, okay, I can build this. I want to exit in 1, 2, 3 years, and I want to have some money. The problem is that if you're going to succeed in exiting and get some money, you need to be passionate from the beginning. Sometimes it's all even about the case that they don't have an idea, so they choose an idea which they think is suitable. But that's not good for yourself and not good for your resilience. The second part is it's a high cost of leadership. I don't know any great leader that can certainly tell me that, it's worth it. Most people, and I would say an absolute majority, is much more happier not being a leader. And then when I look at myself, I've been in different leadership positions. It's not the case that I've been the most happy when I've been in a leadership position. The case is that I have an idea, this may be true, maybe not, that I'm okay and even good as a leader. But secondly, I'm usually becoming a leader because I'm so passionate about something that I want to do it. And then I accept being a leader and leading in order for us to win together. And that makes my resilience very high, because I know that I chose it and I'm so passionate about the outcome that I'm ready to lead, even having the cost. In ad clouds, I had to fire everyone on one day. That mental cost of having to do that is, for me, it's extreme, but it also taught me the lesson that next time I start a company, I want to do it 100%. I need to do the right thing, because otherwise it's not worth it. And I think every founder out there should have that clear. So set yourself up for resilience. So that was, I think the hard truth. But you can say like, okay, I don't know if I'm genetically predestined to have great or bad resilience, if I handle stress well or not. And I think that is something you need to be really honest about yourself, because startups is stress. If you don't handle stressors good, then you are obviously in a disadvantage. But as I said in the beginning, you can also improve your resilience. And I think there is some sources out there, but all science I've read, and I discussed this a lot, my brother is a doctor, and he sees a lot of patients with mental problems. And I think sometimes he feels that life itself in our modern society can be very stressful. I think life before could also be very stressful, even if I have no experience of it. But what the science, as I understand it, says, and what I work on, is 5 things. Build your connections. People get more resilient when they have perspective and context, talking with others, when they can share, when they get mental reinforcement. That's also one of the reasons I think it's important to have co-founders. Wellness. As a fund, we work a lot with wellness, and we try to support startups that we believe create wellness or foster wellness. The next 100 years, I'm very happy I live now, because I think we can be able to correct a lot of our mistakes and do a lot of good. And that gives me purpose to overcome challenges. Embrace healthy thoughts. This is something very common. Now, I think on Twitter, for just 2 or 3 weeks ago, there were this thread, a lot of famous VCs talked about, like, pessimists, they are sometimes right. Optimists change the world, or build things. And I think that's 100% right. You should always try to focus on optimistic things. Bad thoughts, they destroy your own resilience. They take away energy. Great leaders focus on traits that they have themselves that are good, that they can improve. They don't focus on only bad traits. And that's the same when you lead other people. And the last one, seeking help. So, and I think Giedrė was really on point there. There is a lot of help, and I can actually go over to the next slide. There is a lot of help out there. You can, if you only search on like resilience on Google or DuckDuckGo, you will see so many articles. you have a lot of startups, everything from, I talked about Doppel and Limerick, startups we support that, help people. I know for a fact when I was in Vilnius that there is a lot of ways for startup founders in Lithuania to talk with other startup founders. I think this medium is a great way, but it's very important to, if you feel that you need help, both in knowledge, but also in and you're also always free to reach out to me, and I will give you my best advice, because I know how it is to feel very alone as a founder and feel that the challenges are mounting on top of you and you have no help. You're afraid of talking with, you can't talk with your team because you're trying to protect them from the awful truth. You can't talk with your investors because you're afraid that they will see you as a failure, and it's just building up inside of you. But that is not how it should be. So I urge every one of you to always seek help in advance, seek help when it goes well, and seek help when it goes bad. With those words, I'm just gonna give you my book advice. So I think I started out with mistakes. When I read The Hard Things About Hard Things, or The Hard Thing About Hard Things of Ben Horowitz, it was very eye-opening for me, because I realized that everything he wants for I have done, and I promised myself to not do the same. Follow his advice for next time. The next book is Grit: The Power of Passionate Perseverance, I think it's pronounced, by Angela Duckworth. Great book about resilience. That's my first tip. If you're seeking help, read that. She is going deep both on the science and also how come some founders, it seems that they have luck. I don't say that there's no luck. Obviously there is a lot of things that affect you that you can't control, but it's also the fact that when you are resilient, both as a team and as a founder, you win more often. Then, just to not only talk about startups, two of the books that helped me the most is I can't even pronounce this because I think this is Russian. Andrei Platonov's Soul. He writes about Turkmenic people in Kazakhstan under Soviet rule, and how they are not fighting for freedom, but how they are oppressed and surviving anyhow, which I think is one of the strongest books I ever read, and how people together can build up resilience against great challenges. And lastly, Giuseppe Ungaretti, which is an Italian author, and one of great poetry, also about survival. And I think all founders should have these 4 books. So just go out there and buy them and read them, and then send me a review on LinkedIn. So thank you for having the opportunity to talk for all of you. I hope we, as fund joyans, will come back in physical form to Lithuania as soon as possible, and have a lot of great investments there in 2020 and the years coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. It was really insightful, and it's always good to hear, the real stories, and not always those success stories, but what came into your way to success, So thank you very much. And I have one question. How about investors from your perspective? Should I share those challenges that come to my way with my investor, or no?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think the answer on that question would be, it's a balance, and the balance would be 2 things. So you have one is, I think you should have some relationships So depending, if we say you have 10 investors, I think you as a founder should develop that kind of close relationship with some of them, maybe 2, 3, probably the ones who either, you have a great relationship with, great chemistry, or that are your lead and so on. So probably you should probably not, just push it out to everyone. That's the first one. The second one is that I think this is also about setup. What I notice is that if you started out from a bad point where you maybe, not lied, but was a little bit unclear about the truth, you maybe, hided some things that, this goes very well, but you didn't say that, this other thing didn't go so well, is very hard to reverse. Mm-hmm. So I'm on a board on a company, and one thing I really like about this founder is that he, from the beginning, from talking, and this is actually an angel investment from my part, personally angel investment, he was very clear with me, and that worked because obviously if that would have meant that I lost all my trust in him, that's a problem. But it worked because 80% it was great work, and those 20% challenges where he had made a mistake, he owned that directly to me in our talks, and he said to me like, okay, going forward, my mission is to win and minimize those mistakes, and I'm going to come to you in order to actively raise the value of the company by getting your help, being honest, and being able to do the right thing and the better thing. So I think that is the perspective you need to have.
But is it different comparing VC funds and angel investors?
Yeah, I think obviously, but I would also say that a lot of our enjoyance, I feel that we are very close to a lot of our companies. So now in COVID, we sent out emails and had video calls, obviously, because we couldn't sit in the same room, with all our portfolio companies, and there's a lot of portfolio companies, and asked them like, okay, what's your challenge right now? How has this affected you? Be honest with us. How can we help you guys? And as long as you put the right structure for that conversation from the beginning, they know that we are there because we want to make a lot of money. They know exactly that we are there, because we can only invest in them. We can only bridge finance or go into another round if that also makes financial sense. We can't do it as a charity. On a personal level, I can sit with the founder for a very long time, but I can't, give him something. And, if that's not part of a plan to actually overcome that challenge. But I think when you're honest about that, it's much easier. And when we talk to our companies, my feeling, obviously, this you have to ask them to get the 100% honest answer. But when we talk with them and we got their answers, the feeling is that, those who it went, had really hard time because they maybe were in industries that was very affected. They were honest and they told us that, because then we can actually come up with a solution together. I think the real, this is one of the things I actually learned in law school, which I use today, is that, when you negotiate with someone, the most important thing is to understand the real interest, like what's behind their solution. And that's the same, with helping a startup or, going out and get, like, what's the real interest between you and the founder, and try to be as honest as that, around, and clear about that. And then the trust and, will be there. And then you can talk about everything.
Exactly, because both of you want the same success.
Yeah. And
exactly.
and that's also, I think a tip for all the founders there. You need to choose VCs or angels that have the same alignment, incentives that the same incentives that you have. That's really important. Do not come to a situation where your VC wants something very different from what you want, both in regards to financial outcome, but also in your company, how you're going to build that up, what you believe in. So that's also part of building up the resilience in your company, to have the right investors.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And could you tell us more, how do you scout startups right now? For example, in Lithuania, what do you see here in Lithuania?
Yeah, so we are actually having a call. We had a call with a Lithuanian startup this morning. Can't tell more about that, but we are looking very actively. We, as a lot of others, venture firms, have a lot of tools. So we are very proud of our data tools. So we, we scrape data from everything from LinkedIn to Startup Lithuania to all places where we can find a startup. But we also get a lot of intros from people we met, and now we also in startup fair we have registered, and we'll be able to see a lot of startups and go through them in order to reach out. But I want to say this to everyone: please, if you feel that the description of our fund was compelling, if you are raising and if you think you're onto something great, contact me. I am always there, always answering.
Thank you. And every founder who is searching for investment for their startup, they can join Startup Includer, right? And you're gonna see there as well.
Absolutely.
Sameer, and thank you all for watching. Don't forget to follow Startup Fair on Facebook to watch previous session, this one, if you want to rewatch it, or share it with your friends. And don't forget to follow the hashtag on LinkedIn book challenge, where startup ecosystem members gonna share different books that you must read. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week.